All right, welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining today. I just so this is a new platform I'm trying, Crowdcast. I used it before, but before I was using Zoom, but I wanted to try a new platform for to host this event. So if you just want to put something in the chat to tell me that you can hear me and you can see me, that would be awesome. All right, perfect. That's very good. Okay, so um, welcome to this online meetup. Learn how to process a list with Helper Flow in 25 minutes. So again, I'll try to stay within the 25 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes over. So the plan for today is hello and welcome. That's what I'm doing now. Now, my name is Max Katz, and I lead community for Okta Workflows. So this event is it's a monthly event that we run, and this event is being recorded, and then recording will be available actually on Crowdcast. So if you go to the same page where you registered, the recording will be available instantly after the event ends, which is pretty neat. But we will also make this recording available on our YouTube channel, and then probably tomorrow you get an email with the link to that YouTube and also some additional resources. All right. Also, if you would like to say hello in the chat, please say hello. I always like to ask people if they, of course, want to do that, to maybe share where they're coming from, where they're joining from. So just feel free to do that in the chat. I'm joining from the San Francisco Bay Area today. All right. So the plan, again, we'll spend most of the time. I'm going to show you how to build a flow with Helper Flow. And then we should have maybe a few minutes at the end to for questions. Orlando, Florida, welcome, and Oslo, Norway, very good, welcome. Okay. Cool. All right, let's go to workflows. Okay, so in general, a helper flow. What's the helper flow? Actually, let me go back here for a second. That's all I have. This is my other slide here. So again, we're going to use. I'm going to show you two main examples. It's how to use a for each card to process a list, and also how to use a streaming option to process a list. But just in general, a helper flow is useful. Usually you use it to process a list of something, right? So for example, if you have a list of users, or and you want to process each user in a list, right? So you want to check when was the last time they logged in, or you want to check maybe to which groups a particular user belongs. So this is where helper flow comes in, is that you have a list of, again, I'm going to say users because I think it's very common object that's you would use in Okta workflows. You have a list of users, and then you need to process the list one at a time. So this is where helper flow comes in. There are other examples where a helper flow could be used. Maybe you want to calculate something, not necessarily process a list, but just maybe do some calculations. So you could use a helper flow as well. And then, of course, you can build it in such way that you can reuse that flow, right? So if you calculate something frequently, you can build it in a way it can be reused, and then you can reuse it in many different flows. But again, today we're going to be the focus is on how to process a list one at a time, right? Okay, so let's go to Okta workflows, and I have where's my folder? I've got a folder here called loops. All right, I'm already in this folder. And so I'm going to create, so first we're going to start with for each. And I'm going to create a new flow. And let's give this a name. And we're going to say this main, and call this for each. All right, now the first is how do we get, what list are we going to be working with? And as I mentioned, it's very common to work with users, but of course you can work with groups and of course other serve objects. But let's work with users in this example. So I'm going to use the Okta connector. And then I'm going to use this list users with filter action. All right. Now for the result set, I'm going to use this option because, again, we're using for each. We're going to use streaming in the second example, and then save. And then I don't need these inputs, so we can just click save. Now, just for the testing, we're going to use the provisioned, and then we can test this card. And I should have, I think, 3 or 4 users who are deprovisioned, right? And so we got 3 users. Again, a very short list, small list. Most likely you can have a much bigger list, but I think it just works really the same way. All right, so again, now you want to process, right? You want to do something with each user in that list. And so the first example is that we're going to be using for each. And I'm going to click. So this is a function, and I'm going to search for each. And so the one I want to use is the list one. All right. And so the way this works is that you can also think of it, again, it's like a loop, right? I mean, it is a loop in a way. So you give it a list of values, and then we're going to iterate over those values. And so right here is the list. And then the result from this card is the list of users. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the users and I'm going to connect it to the for each list. All right. So this is the list. And what you do next is you need to select the helper flow. Choose a flow. So this is the flow that will into which every user will be passed, and then again you can do something with that user. Now, what the only thing is here is that if I have a helper flow, I can choose it here, but I don't have one yet. And so what I actually recommend is, because unless you set a flow here, you can't save this. If I try to save, it's going to give me an error because it's expecting a helper flow here, which I don't have yet. So what I usually do is actually I'm going to remove this card. And I almost always usually start with a helper flow, and then I go back to the main flow. Now you can do it, of course, whichever way you prefer. But again, you might run into this problem where if you don't have a helper flow, you won't be able to save this flow. All right. But again, let's leave this as is, and then we're going to add this card back in just a second. Let's go to, and let's create a new flow. And this is going to be helper for each. All right. Now, so to make any helper flow, we need to add an event, a special event, and the event is called helper flow. Okay, so let's do that. And now we're going to define inputs on this flow. All right. So what data, what objects are going to be passed to this flow? Okay, so there are different ways you can set this up. So I'm going to show you a number of ways. But number one is that, let's say you want to get the whole user object. We can just type user. Okay, and one key is that we want to make sure that the type is correct. So this is important. So you want to make sure the type is correct. It defaults to text, but we want to select object. Okay. So that's one way to do it. Now, well, let's actually let's see. Should we save or test? Well, let's save this, and let's go ahead and run this quickly. So I'm going to go back. Let me go back to my original flow, main, and now I can actually add. So I've got for each still selected here. I'm going to select for each. And then I'm going to connect the users again. And now I can choose a flow. And let's go to this is helper for each. Okay. And so we can see what happened is that when you set a flow, this area is loaded. Okay, so let me show you this again quickly. Let me show you this quickly again. So I get add function, and then for each, and then I connect the list. So notice that has no other inputs here except this concurrency, but this was there before. So notice, actually, oops, sorry. You know what? Let me do one more thing here. Sorry. Let me go back to my helper flow for just a second. It's gonna be demonstrated a little bit better. One more thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna create another field here, email. Now, email is text. So again, what I did now is I had this input before, and I created another input right here. All right. So let me go back. Sorry, I'm going back to the wrong place. And let's open main. This is what I'm going to demonstrate. So I select for each, I connect users, and then I'm going to choose a flow. So again, this is important because once you select a flow, once you choose a flow, so notice these two inputs appeared. Okay, so these will appear, and of course, these are dependent on the inputs that you set on the helper flow. Okay, so again, these inputs are dependent on the inputs you set in helper flow. So let me open the helper flow. Okay, so you can see I've got user and email, and I've got user and email. Okay, so this is a really important step. Now, it says, if you read the labels here, it says run this flow with the following values, right? So the next step is we need to provide those values to the helper flow. We need to decide. So we have the user object here, and then we need to choose what specific values we're sending there. So the first one is user. And then the way you select those values is that there's a little error. You select the error, and then you set, the item, right? So this is the current user object. So we decided to pass the entire user object. So again, you can decide to do that, or you don't have to. But in this case, so we're going to select item. Now for email, right? So this is a specific property in the object. I'm going to click this list, and I'm going to scroll down, and then here I've got email. All right. So again, you can pass the entire object if you want, or you can pass a specific field, right? Again, it's up to you. It really just depends on the context and what you're trying to achieve. Okay. But again, these inputs are dependent, or will be set based on the inputs right here. Right. So that's a key. Okay. Let's do something really simple here. I'm going to do, let's do this. I'm going to use a card called get, and this is just to demonstrate how it works. So I'm going to map the user to this get, and the way the get works is that it allows you to get a particular field from an object. Now, and I'm going to do email, right? And this is just to demonstrate that we're doing the same thing, but here I'm retrieving email from this object, but I also have it passed directly to the helper flow as well, right? But this is just to demonstrate it's really the same thing. Finally, I'm going to use this assign again, and I'm just going to map email. All right. So again, all we're doing is just displaying the data that we're passing to the helper flow. Okay. Anyhow, I think we're ready to run this. Let's turn this on, and let's turn this on. And let's test. So it's important you turn on both flows. Okay. And so this is the main one. And then we can see that 3 objects were passed to the helper flow. Okay, which makes sense. We have 3 users. And I'm going to go to helper flow and go to flow history. And we can see you have 3 runs, right? Also it makes sense because I have 3 objects, 3 users. And now here, so if I select the first one, so this is Mason, we can see. So this is the email that's being passed directly, and this is the email that retrieved from the object, from the user object. And if I look here, this is Jacqueline, and this is Alicia, and right here. Okay. And as for the, you can see for the input, you can see the email passed directly, and also, and this is the object. So again, you can pass the object if you want, or you can pass each of these fields or properties directly to the helper flow. Okay. So that's really all you need to do. Now, once you have a current object in the helper flow, right, you do whatever you need to do. So let's do another example. It's very common to pass the ID of the user, right? Because you might want to look up other things for that particular user. So if you wanted to do that, you can do ID like this. Okay. Now, but let's say you want to pass a value that's not in the object. Let's say you want to count. Okay, just some number you need to pass. Okay, so let's save this. So you want to save. Let's go back to the main one. Now, once you make any changes, right? So this is kind of an extra step you need to take. Is right. You don't see those values here, right? Because we made changes to the flow, helper flow, but those values are not reflected here yet. So what you need to do is to go back here, and then it's already selected, and then choose. All right. And so this is what happens. All these values are being reset. So it's kind of an extra step you need to make if you make changes. All right. So this is the user. Sorry. So we're going to select this item here. This is the email. All right. Now this is the ID. Okay. Now this count, I'm going to just pass 100. Let's say 1,000. One thing I forgot to say is that this should be a number. Okay. So, but it should be fine. So we can change this. Oh, I have to make changes to the helper flow. Okay. But let's say I want to pass this just as a number, right? Just a whatever extra information to the helper flow. All right. And so if I go back here, let's add the count. Okay. And let's run this again. All right. Let's go to helper flow. We should have, and so we can see that we've got all these 3 more runs, and now we have the email, we got the ID, and of course the email ID, they change for each run, but the count stays the same. So you can pass additional information to the helper flow. So it's not necessarily need to come from the object. Okay. One little sort of tip I can show you is, let me just make a change here. Let me go back here. Let me remove this. Let's say I want to make a change here to a number just to make it right. So this is a number. I click save. So again, if I choose a flow, these values will be reset. So one little sort of helpful tip we can do is that if you have a lot of values here, and maybe it's not as easy to remember what was mapped to what. So what you can do is something like this. You can add a second card next to it, and then drag the users this way, and then choose the flow. And let's choose the flow. And then what this does is that you can kind of see, so it's a little bit easier, right? Oh, so user is mapped to items. So you can kind of copy in a way, right? So this might help you slightly if you have a long list of values, right? So we're going to go item, and this is email, and this is ID, right? And then this is just a number, right? Something like this. And then of course you want to remove this, right? And then save. Okay. Anyhow, so this is how it works with for each, right? So yes, so it's important. So the data types are match what you have in helper flow and what you have here. And then again, these fields that you see here, again, are going to depend on what input you have set up on the helper flow, right? But that's kind of at a high level how it works. So again, the helper flow will be called for each value in the list. All right, so we've got a few minutes left, so let's do the streaming option. Okay, so let's do this, and let's call this main streaming. Let's see. And then we're going to use the same Okta card. Okay. Now I'm going to use the streaming option here. But again, we're going to run into a similar problem is that we don't have a helper flow yet, and it's not going to let us save. So let me show you what I mean. So if I can select the provision here, but the challenge is that we don't have a flow yet. And so it's not going to let me save, which is kind of a little bit annoying, I think, right? So even with streaming, what I usually do is just for testing, what I do is I go back to this option because it allows me to just test this, how this card works. We tested this earlier, so I'm not going to do it again. Okay. But now we can go and create a second, the helper flow, and we're going to call this helper streaming. All right. And same, let me close this one. And same as before, to make a helper flow, we need to use the helper flow event. And now, so the setup is a little bit different here. Is before you would create the inputs for the helper flow. You do select inputs, but they're a little bit different. So the first input is a record type object, okay, and then the second one is called state, also of type object. Okay. Now, right here, email. Email. I can't spell email. This is going to be ID, for example. Okay. So again, record is the current user object. Okay. And then I can also define the properties that the object has. Okay. And I'm going to show you state in a second, how state works. This allows you to pass additional information, data to the helper flow. Okay. So it's a little bit different here. So the first has to be a record or of type object. Okay. So let's save. And let's go back to the, let me turn this off. This is the one. Okay, so now I'm ready to switch to streaming. Oh, sorry, not suspended. This is the wrong one. So I'm going to go to options, streaming. All right, and now I'm going to choose a flow. So notice the difference is that there is no for each card. So the way this works is that if before you sort of have to manually prepare the list and then sort of pass it to this for each card, and then so streaming does it automatically. So it's sort of built in. So the streaming option will automatically stream the records to the helper flow, right? So in general, it works really well for if you have a very large list of data. So this is the recommended way to go instead of the for each. Okay, but now we can choose a flow, and let's see. So helper streaming. Okay, and notice that we don't set up any inputs here, right? That's all we need to do. So let's save. Let's turn this on. Let's actually open the helper flow. Let's make sure it's on too. And as before, let's do just the assign. Let's just pass the email here and the ID. Okay. All right. Let's give this a run. All right, notice one thing with streaming is that it tells you how many records were streamed. So in our case, it's 3. Let's go back here, flow history. But it works in a very similar way. We've got 3 records here, and then we can see that we got the email and the ID. All right. Now, if you wanted to, quickly, you can also do what we did before in the previous example. Do something like this. and then just retrieve the email from the record itself. So that's also an option. Now, one last thing I'm going to show you is how to use the state. So remember, in the previous example, we passed account to the helper flow, which was not part of the user object. So we can do something similar here. And I'm going to call this count, and I'm going to make this to be a number. Okay, and I'm going to save, and I'm going to back to here. So right here it says click or create, click or drop here to create, right? So this is where I create that variable. Now the key is that the name has to match exactly what I define in helper flow. So right here, the name, this is the input. I want to make count. So capital C. So this is important. And then I'm going to pass, 1000, and I'm going to make this to be a number. Okay. So the name is really important, that it matches. Again, this count here matches the name here. So this way you can pass any additional information to the helper flow. Okay, so let's give this a test. So same 3 records. And let's see here. So, I forgot. I think I forgot to add the count. Here, let's do this. Let's add the count. Let's save, and let's run this again. All right, and go here. And so we can see the count, right? So the ID and the email, they change, but the count stays the same. And this is the other card that I added, right, that retrieves the email. All right. So that's how it works. The setup is slightly different. I mean, the components are very similar. Again, there's no need to create the for each list. Is that the card does sort of that automatically behind the scenes, and it streams the records to the helper flow. So again, it is usually recommended if you have a very, very large list is to use streaming. Okay, but as before, the name and the type is important here. All right. I think, let me just check if there are any questions. Give me a sec here. All right. That's all I wanted to show you, right? So this is, I'll show you 2 ways how to set up a helper flow using for each, and then using the streaming option. And again, once you have the list, so the inputs working, right, then you can process or use whatever logic you need, whatever cards you need to process the current object in helper flow, right? Whether it's a user or a group, just whatever makes sense. All right. I think I'm good on time. We're maybe just a few minutes over, but that's okay. Also, let me know if you have any questions. So you can put them in the chat. There's also ask a question section, but whichever you find works for you, feel free to add any questions. If you go to this link, and again, I'm going to send you this in an email and a follow-up message. It has all the resources from documentation, tutorials, office hours, tips, how-to guides. I think everything you need to get started or just learn in general about workflows. And if you have any questions, my email is there, so please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to get questions. So very cool. All right. I see. I wish for a workload office hours meetup, in-person meetup before Octane. I think that's a good idea. We can do like a meetup, just a general, I guess, office day, or just an evening meetup. So that's a great idea. Thank you. Well, cool. Very cool. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Oh, one last thing I forgot to say at the beginning. So again, we're going to be running online meetups using this platform. So there's a way to follow our channel. So if you follow our channel, Okta Workflows, and if you go in Crowdcast, It's kind of in the upper right corner or more towards the middle. It says Okta Workflows. So you can follow us, and then you'll be notified when we go live. So even if you don't register for an event, which is, I think you should, but sometimes maybe you forgot, you'll be notified when this channel goes live, and then say, oh, this is interesting, I can join. Okay, so do follow us, and I think that's it. I'll see if there are any other questions. All right, I don't see any more questions. Then thank you again for joining. You'll get a follow-up message with all the resources, a replay, and thanks, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.